Hi, and welcome to the FPL Stats Fix for Game Week 33. My name's Tom Campbell. You can find me on Twitter at UtterlyTC. And in this week's video, we're going to take a look at the best replacements for Matt Doherty. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the FPL Stats Fix. Apologies for missing last week. I had a funeral to attend, so I couldn't put out a video last week, but I really hope everyone has had a great game week. It wasn't a double game week 32, was it? It was one of those rare game weeks where we actually finally got back to some kind of normality with a normal suite of fixtures. So I hope everyone got on well and had lots of green arrows. Now, just before I get started on this week's video, which is really going to focus in on defensive options following the really untimely injury to Matt Doherty, I do just want to give a massive shout out to Fantasy Football Fix's update to their app, which you can download for free on iOS and Android now. There are some awesome new features, guys, that I really recommend you to go and check out. There are some push notifications that you can subscribe to, and you can tailor them to make sure that you're not over solicited. There's some just so cool stats features that you can actually build out your own tables using the app and actually create really specific bespoke tables for you to dive into, and just all at the touch of a button on your phone whilst you're out and about. So I just think it's incredible what the guys have done there, and I really encourage everyone to get amongst it and get that app downloaded and start playing with it, because for me, I think it's just an awesome addition to the Fantasy Football Fix sort of suite of tools that we can use. So get your comments into the video if you like what's been done on the app. Give a shout out to the developers, and by all means ask if there's anything else that you'd like to see on there. But I really do encourage you to check out that app update, guys, and share the news with all of your friends who are playing as well. So yeah, big shout out to Fix for developing that. Now, in terms of this particular week's video, what I'm going to do is a lot of us will have picked up Matt Doherty, and apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I listen to a lot of podcasts and what have you, and I know that there is some disagreement as to the pronunciation of his name, but I'm sure we all know who I'm referring to. So Matt Doherty's been someone who had a really tough start at Spurs when he first signed, and we were all enthusiastic when he was actually bought. But then he sort of struggled to adapt. There was question marks over his ability to track back and actually the energy required to play at that in that wing-back position. But under Conte, he's had a complete resurgence and he's been brilliant. But unfortunately, he picked up an untimely injury in the game against Villa over the weekend and is now not expected to feature again this season. So we wish him well. But obviously, from a manager's perspective, focus now needs to sort of be directed into who we can actually pick up to replace him. So now, with only a handful of game weeks to go, we're about to approach, or we're approaching double game week 33. Every transfer is obviously crucial. You're not expecting to be in a position that you'd want to kind of unpin those or unravel those transfers. They kind of need to be lens focused until the end of the season. So the analysis that I'm doing is really with an intention of players that you'd be comfortable including from double game week 33 ideally, and onwards through to the end of the season. So the first port of call was to look at the game week range 33 through 38, as I say, through the remainder of the season. And then I focused on defense difficulty. So if I scroll down here, you can see the teams there. I'm just going to stop there so that you can see that on screen, guys. And I've filtered this on defense difficulty. So if these are the teams that Fix are saying have the best upcoming games from a defensive perspective. Now they focus at the top there. You can see Leicester, obviously a lovely double game week, or maybe not lovely with two away games, but an attractive double game week in double game week 33. So no surprise there with a home match against Villa to follow, Burnley as well. But it sort of made me think that, is it right that we should immediately gravitate towards those teams? And my feeling is actually that we shouldn't, because when I started to look at the statistics in terms of defensive performance, whilst the fixtures align themselves nicely to suggest that they're not against teams that you'd expect to create a whole host of chances, I don't necessarily believe that the teams are defending particularly well. Obviously, Burnley have just had really disappointing result, I suspect in part as a consequence of Everton managing to beat an insipid Man United, and I suspect their confidence was hit hard there. So my temptation instead, and I will explain this in the stats in a moment, is to look at some other teams. So I'm actually going to focus on the teams beneath that. I'm actually going to look at Chelsea, Spurs, happily, as you would have a Spurs player freed up or a spot freed up when you take Doherty out of your team. Aston Villa and Crystal Palace instead. Now, the astute amongst you will notice that Villa don't have a fixture in double game week 33. Not ideal, I would concede, but you would also see that, as I say, the transfer is with a view to the rest of the season. So you do have the prospects of these upcoming doubles a little bit later on and not that far away as well. So I have included Villa as well and Crystal Palace from a budget option. So those are the teams that I'm going to focus on. Now, diving into the Opta Stats Sandbox here, I've basically decided that the game week range I've extended and called out these 4 teams that I mentioned there as well. Let's just flick a quick moment back to the teams. I do want to show this just real quick. If I change this up to more recent, game week 26, and have a look at defensive actions and look at shots in the box conceded, I didn't like this from Leicester. Conceding 11 shots in the box per game isn't good. It's not what you want from your defence. Yes, I know from a defensive perspective, from a goalkeeper perspective, I should say, that would be encouraging. I didn't necessarily like that in terms of expecting your defenders to pick up the clean sheet points. And, defenders, it is something that yes, you have opportunities for attacking points, of course, and we will look at that in the stats in a moment, but it's not really supporting the fact that they could actually get clean sheets. Burnley better, yes, but it's still around that 9 mark as well, so I didn't particularly like that. So that's consequently why when we looked at the players, we filtered against those 4 teams that I mentioned previously. And when I scroll down here, if I focus in on, let's look at the key metrics instead, and look at total shots instead. There are some players here who I think are interesting that we can take a look and do some comparisons on, guys. So main feature today, and I appreciate budget might be a concern, as Matt Doherty is not a particularly expensive player. It's one of the reasons why he was so appealing. But Antonio Rudiger, who may already be in people's teams, is a player who I really do think is someone who should be featuring in the teams. He was pretty incredible yesterday in the Champions League. I had an unfortunate slip, but such an interesting player in relation to how he performs, going forward, as well as the team being historically quite resolute. So we're going to take a look at Rudiger. We also have Marcus Alonso. I've decided to not focus in on mainly because of the question mark over minutes, and I do think in the remainder of the season, you really want to be looking at players who you are a little bit more confident that will actually play. So I've decided to do a comparison between Chelsea assets of Antonio Rudiger and Reece James. And in relation to some of the other options that you can see on screen at the moment, I thought it would be kind of cool to look at Sergio Reguilon and compare him to Matty Cash at Aston Villa. Relatively similar prices there, 5.1 million and 5.2 million. Guys, and so we could actually see whether or not there's a clear winner there. So the more kind of premium range, I'd say Rudiger and James. We'll do a comparison there and see if there's anything in that, and I appreciate you might need to make that work with your budget to accommodate that. If you're looking for kind of more direct level replacement around that midpoint for defenders, we'll look at Matty Cash and Sergio Reguilon respectively. And just for kicks, I've done a sort of budget comparison as well. Now, Emerson Royal features here, but the player who I've compared it to him is actually, I think it's pronounced Gui at Crystal Palace, and I think that's quite an interesting one to look at if you're looking at more budget. So 3 comparisons for us to consider. So the first one, I used the player heat maps feature to do this comparison. There are other tools on fantasyfootballfix.com that you can have a play with if you really want to dive into the stats. But when we actually initially select Antonio Rudiger, it will default to the full game week range. I think that's probably the most appropriate to include all of his performance so far. And then I've selected, as the second player, I've selected Reece James. So the stats at the top here, you can see these are totals, right? So points per game, that leapt out to me. Almost 6 per game for Reece James over the course of the season is awesome. Now, whilst this is lower for Antonio Rudiger, he's obviously played more, so there's been more opportunities for Chelsea to concede. But that in of itself may be a concern to you guys, because there have been a few untimely injuries for Reece James, haven't there? But that's something that leapt out. And just in terms of that really rudimentary stat of points per game, Reece James is winning and winning quite handsomely, quite comfortably. Starting percentage, though, here, look at that. That's about as nailed on as you can get at this stage of the season in terms of your assuredness of minutes. So minutes-wise, Rudiger has the edge. Reece James, you'd be a little wary there over the fitness in terms of how he's got on over the season. Not that he's been to blame, but there have been some injury problems. So scrolling down on the heat map. Now, I found this really interesting. Now, on the right-hand side, Reece James, that's kind of what you would expect. I think if people were to have predicted that, or if you saw that heat map without knowing who it related to, you'd probably not be, Reece James wouldn't be far from your mind, right? Rudiger, though, on the left-hand side, I found that quite interesting in terms of the advancement into the opposition penalty area, both in terms of open play actions here and then more from the set pieces as well. That's encouraging to me. And we will come down and look at the comparison between the two set of attacking stats as well. So again, overall stats here, or overall numbers here, we will look at some averages in a few moments. But actually, shots of 41 shots for what is nominally a centre half, quite encouraging, I'd say, for Rudiger. 41 there. Reece James, who's played way less, 24 shots. That's still absolutely fine. But he's played a lot less. If we take a look at the average positions as well, that looks much more traditional, but the heat map gives the context in terms of how Rudiger does actually advance into the opposition's half, and we know that he likes a speculative shot from distance and clearly a threat in the box as well at set plays. So possibly not much to differentiate them at that stage. We'll come on and look at some more in a moment. The average defensive radar per 90, I wouldn't recommend focusing in on that for this particular analysis, because we're not so specifically interested in defensive actions here because it's a team level metric, the clean sheet. We're actually looking more at the attacking. And this is where you can start to see where Reece James is really winning out, right? You've got crosses, goals, big chances created, attempted assists, expected assists, goal assists, shots in the box and shots on target, and XG as well. He wins them all. So that starts to give an indication as to if you're willing to take the minutes hit on, minutes risk, I guess, comparative minutes risk on Reece James, then that might suggest that you're going to be well rewarded for that from an attacking perspective. Now, these are stats over the course of the season as well. So even though he's played way less, Reece James is ahead on goals and, as I mentioned above, on XG. So, played a lot less games, had a lot less chances to influence, and yet he's still leading the way in that attacking kind of wing-back role with how Chelsea set up. Shots on target, shots in the box, for Rudiger. They are good. It's not just the fact he's played more, but they are actually, way ahead in relation to the number of shots. So that can't be sniffed at. I did find that quite interesting for, as I say, a centre half. But when we roll down here and look at the kind of more creative output, no great shakes, or rather no surprise, I guess, in relation to how Reece James has absolutely dominated that over the course of the season, despite not having played nearly as many minutes. And now when we actually go down, this is more what I tend to focus on. Those of you who have watched my videos in the past on the channel, I'm a big fan of looking at average stats per 90, and Fix gives you this comparison as well. The blue is the winner, so you can see we've got an absolute dominance here from Reece James over Rudiger in relation to all of these different stats in terms of, as it showed on the graph above, all of these different metrics, all of which I think are particularly relevant as well. Average stats for Reece James, absolutely dominant here over Rudiger. He plays in a more advanced position. The way that they set up, he's expected to influence the attack. Not a surprise, but I do think it highlights quite the disparity there. I really like that comparison there. If I just highlight that, the attempted assists of over 2 a game for Reece James, and an expected assists of 1 in 4, effectively, or just over 1 in 4. So Yeah, a bit of a trade-off, I would say, in terms of minutes. Right now, Reece James is fit, and there's not that much of the season left. They are still in that mix for top 4, top 3. I suspect is or the third place position is obviously the better one to finish in relation to what that means for Champions League campaign starting next season. So there's still lots to play for in the league for them. Reece James, yes, there's a question mark, I guess, over how much he's been able to play this season. Rudiger absolutely nailed on, but hopefully that's given you an indication. If you have got the money to stretch to a premium asset from Chelsea, and a reminder of the fixtures as well, guys, you've got big London derby in game week 33. I suspect people won't be focused in on Chelsea assets as a consequence of the double game week. I do understand that, but as I say, I do think transfers need to be thinking about the progression of the games over the course of the whole season. You could do worse than acknowledge that, and then the fixtures tend to ease with that big double in 35 and 36 respectively. So I think fixtures are absolutely fine. You just maybe wouldn't necessarily be immediately drawn to them because double game week 33, people are going to be fixated on the doubles, and I do get that. Right, let's move on and take a look at the second comparison. So this is kind of more of a mid price point slot that I thought would be more appropriate. Maybe as a one mover, if you're just looking to move Matt Doherty on for a replacement, and you've got a little bit of money maybe in the bank, or you can actually afford either of these. You can see straight away. And again, I've set the game week range to use the whole season because I do think at this stage we've got enough data there for the sample size to be indicative of how they're expected to perform. So not a lot in it in terms of points per game, right? I mean, from rounding perspective, you'd be at four per game for both. Bonus points super close with 11 and 9 respectively. Minutes is way better, right, for Matty Cash. And I mentioned Rudiger 97 being impressive. Fix is reflecting the fact that Matty Cash is a nailed-on starter when he's fit in Steven Gerrard's team, which is obviously to our liking. Reguilon, less so. He's been a little bit in and out of the team. That Antonio Conte expects an awful lot of his wing-backs in that back three system to get up and back on the wings, and we do know that. So there is that question mark, and I suspect that might become into people's thinking as well. But look, when he starts, he's performing well and actually shading Matty Cash in relation to points per game. Both gone over 100 points already, but obviously in 1,835 minutes for Reguilon versus a huge 2,700 plus for Matty Cash. Now, if we scroll down and actually look at the heat maps, now these are wing backs or full backs on opposing sides, but to me that doesn't suggest a huge disparity or a huge leaning one way or the other. The one thing that leapt out to me when I was doing my analysis is these actions here actually in the box. So take the heat map on the right hand side here, or on the left for Reguilon. Fine, you'd expect that, that's where they're expected to be spending the majority of their time in the system. Cash has more aptitude to get into the box and influence the game there, and I liked that as a means by which to potentially get more points, and I think that's actually backed up here in the shots as well. So if we take a look at their shots as well from both players, I like this clump here in the box. So it's not all speculative. To be fair to Reguilon, it's similar, but the volume is higher from in relation to Matty Cash and how he's performed. Just a quick reminder, folks, in terms of how Villa are lined up. Now, mentioned no game week in game week 33, so I appreciate the feedback might be, Tom, you're absolutely crazy. Why on earth would we bring in a player who's not playing? Well, I think there's a few different reasons. I suspect a lot of bench players this week, if squads have been set up in readiness for this big double game week, you would be having a benching headache anyway this week. So I suspect there would be an opportunity in one of these rare circumstances in FPL that you could actually bring in a player who you're not actually intending to play. I think it's not actually that unlikely. I know from my team's perspective, never really talk about my team on here, but from my team's perspective, real benching headaches this week, and it's definitely a game week that some managers might be focused on throwing in their bench boost chip, and I think that's definitely a viable strategy. But I wouldn't necessarily be completely put off by this. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I love those fixtures ongoing, particularly sorry guys, game week 33. They don't have the as we move on, they've got an away match against Leicester, not an easy fixture, but they do have this double moving up a little bit later in the season, and I think that's really where, for someone with likelihood of playing Fix noting at 100%, I really like that. So appreciate it's a bit out of left field to suggest a player who won't be playing in game week 33. Or that's just something I think that is a bit of a nuance here. So let's scroll down and take a little bit look at how the attacking stats, and it's much so in the comparison between Rudiger and Reece James previously, it was a landslide victory for the average attacking radar. This is more close, so I appreciate there's more. There is a winner in terms of Reguilon for the majority of these stats, but it's a little bit closer. So if we scroll down here, you can see the disparity or the mix, I guess, between the different metrics. We're flicking between blues on either side of the screen. So I do think this is more manager type call, and there will be certain stats that people will gravitate to and put more onus on, and that's kind of what these videos are about. So I've talked in the past that I really like Fix's attempted assists stat that they use, and 29 over the course of the season in less minutes to me is something that I actually would look at and pay particular attention to, compared to Matty Cash 24, which is still perfectly reasonable there. Expected assists, so the quality of those assists have been good as well. Now, when we go down to the average, though, this is where Reguilon, and this surprised me as well, is winning out. Now, the volumes or the disparity between the two are not massive, I would say, but it's in terms of if you were looking as a means by which to try and, I guess, differentiate between the two, if you couldn't isolate which player that you'd be particularly focused in on, I suggest that what Fix is telling us here is that over the course of the season, on average, when Sergio Reguilon is playing, these metrics are coming out in favour of the Spurs fullback, which I did find a little bit surprising. Now, they're close. I mean, shots 0.98 to 1.03, that's basically parity. But there is a leaning there, isn't there, in terms of shots on target, shots in the boxes, again, almost identical. But I suggest that if you are looking for something, a means by which to differentiate, between the two, then Fix is suggesting Reguilon may have the edge there. It will be interesting to see how they set up without Doherty playing. Obviously, he has filled in on the left-hand side when he was fit as well, so that should free up more opportunities for Reguilon as well. I think it's worth noting. Now, in relation to the right-hand side on Spurs, we one of the budget options I mentioned, I wanted to look at Emerson Royal, who's not played masses of minutes this season, sort of around the 1,600 or I guess 1,700 minutes mark. And from a Crystal Palace perspective, not a team I would have given much credence to, but the fixtures were light, and I think defensively they've been comparatively impressive since Vieira got the job. And I think the pronunciation here is Guy or Gui. Let's go with Gui. Now look, the 2,700 minutes mark here for him is fantastic. So he's really slotted in well as a trusted member of that Crystal Palace defence, 97%. Emerson Royal's percentage, 68%. This will have been impacted by Doherty's performance. So it's almost like, is it a like-for-like replacement? And does it give an opportunity to Emerson Royal to actually start playing a little bit more down that right-hand side? So let's just scroll down and take a look at just quickly as the points there. So I think it's a difficult comparison to make here, guys, because as I say, his minutes would have been impacted by the person who's been injured that might free up an opportunity. So I think instead the heat maps are more, and the stats associated with their performance, I think, is more where we should focus. Now, this is what we would expect and what we like to see, encroaching into the box and really advance down the right-hand side for a fullback playing for Tottenham. Gui on the left-hand side here, not really advancing into the box through standard play. So, an opportunity to influence from set pieces for sure. Shots volumes, he's played way more minutes as Gui, but there are some shots there that he should actually or is expected to focus to deliver, I should say, as well. But from my perspective, this is the more exciting option here, actually. So we can just scroll down here and look at, I'm going to ignore the defensive radar as well. And we're going to go straight to the averages here, and appreciate he hasn't played loads of minutes, but actually we're seeing a left-leaning set of analysis here in relation to the sort of stats that we like in terms of XG, shots. Shots on target is close, but fair play. Gui does edge that. Shots in the box is equal. And then we've got Emerson Royal kind of dominating the way there in terms of attempted assists, for example. And that's kind of what you'd expect in how he's playing. And he's a really nice price as well. So he would be somebody I would be recommending if you are looking for a direct replacement and he's not going to break the bank. So just a reminder of Spurs' fixtures. We've got Brighton, an away match against the much improved Brentford, home match against Leicester, the double game week to follow, and then Burnley and Norwich after that. So nice run for Tottenham as well. And just to close off this video, guys, as well, I did think it would be worth looking at the predicted points and stats. So using Fix's algorithm, this is how they actually see it. So I've included the rest of the season, as I mentioned before. I've selected defenders. I reduced the ownership to 5% because I think actually some of the folks watching on the video might be looking for differentials as well, and set the maximum price to 5, which is sort of around about where Matt Doherty's price point has found itself. And lo and behold, in Blue Peter fashion, we've got Emerson Royal at the top there in terms of how he's predicted to perform over the course of the remainder of the season. And I thought that was not with the any team filter applied. So Emerson Royal, from a budget perspective, at just 4.5 million, guys, I think is somebody who you could do worse than look at if you are looking for a budget replacement for Matt Doherty. So that about rounds it off for this week's video, guys. Another reminder to please check out the free iOS or Android Fantasy Football Fix app. It is awesome. Some of the changes I just think are incredible. The development that's gone into it is so intricate, so cool. It's all really intuitive. You can build your own stats table, push notifications. There's links to heaps of other content. There's all the usual stuff that was on there as well. The Game Week Live feature is so much fun to have turned on during the course of the game week as well. And you can see your points rolling in. So do please check that out. Do please smash a like on a video on the way out, and do please leave a comment down below in terms of the app and this video as well. And very good luck in double game week 33, and I look forward to talking to you all next week. Take it easy. Have a good week. Bye bye.